Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Grafana Office Hours. It's a full house today, but first, I'll introduce myself. My name is Marie Cruz. I'm one of your developer advocates here at Grafana Labs. And with me today, I have my colleagues, Nicole and Paul. So, introduce yourself, amazing people.
Hey, I'm Nicole van der Hoeven. I'm happy to be here with three awesome people at the end of the week.
Yeah. Hi, Paul Balog. I'm just, yeah, definitely happy. Glad it's Friday
Yeah.
already.
And I'd like to introduce our very special guest, John. Really amazing to have you on board with us. Why don't you quickly introduce yourself and what is it that you do?
Yeah, great. So glad to be here. I've been watching these and been waiting for an opportunity to do one. So thanks for having me on. My name's John, and I'm a UI test engineer, specifically working in the web space. I've been doing this for since 2011, so whatever that math is. And I've seen a lot of change. Like the dark days of Flash, and it's pretty disgusting. But we've come a long way, and I've had a great opportunity for the last 3 years to work at NASA Ames here in California, working on web-based mission control software. It's really cool, and I'm really excited to kind of share kind of what I've been doing, and it basically share my past journeys with performance testing in general. And I should also say I'm a K6 champion and also a playwright champion. So you might see both of those in this, maybe. Spoilers that you will, but excited to be here, and looking forward to talking to you all.
Amazing. So, just for some fun fact, I first met John. So, I used to organize a meetup group here in the UK, like something locally that me and my friend Giridar started. So, it's about Cyprus. And John was our first like speakers as well, where he shared with us the journey that he experienced when using Cypress on like a previous like project. So now it's great that we're now collaborating again, and that you are also a K6 champion and a playwright champion as well. So you have a lot of amazing insights to share. But before all that, we have quite a few announcements from our side. So, starting with the Grafana for Beginner series. So, our amazing colleague Lisa, she started the Grafana for Beginner series, and the first episode was really good. Like the analogy that she created around what is observability, it's just really amazing because then we can explain to other people who don't really have that knowledge yet about observability in a really fun and really
Yeah.
like simple analogy. So I
I
look forward
feel,
to
yeah.
watching like
Yeah,
more
I feel like I'm
episodes.
ready to start going to medical school after watching that. That was awesome. She did a
Yeah.
great job.
Yeah, so make sure to check that out. It's also gonna be linked on our Grafana community page. So it will be like really really amazing content to look forward to. Nicole, anything from your side?
Yes, I've been dipping my toes in the multilingual video territory, and we started off, Marie and I, with a video on how testing relates to observability, like why Grafana even acquired K6, and just the differences and similarities between the two, and how they really are both just trying to get closer to this ideal of reliable, always available, and scalable software. That is in Tagalog though, so Filipinos only. And also, yesterday, I went into another language. We did Cafe con Grafana with my colleagues Antonio and Leandro. And we talked to another graphanista, Matthias, about all about logs, actually. So I'm also going to put that in the comments.
Nice.
Paul, over to you.
Yeah. Well, it's crazy. I couldn't understand any of those other two videos when I was trying to watch them. So, but yeah, no, exciting news next week. And that's partially why I'm so excited about today being Friday, because next week is KubeCon in North America. hosted over in Chicago, and Grafana will have a booth at C18 in the sponsors area. So I'll be there actually too. So definitely swing by there. It's always exciting time at KubeCon.
Nice. Amazing. Well, that's it from the announcement from our side. John, I think first question that we want to ask is how long have you been using Grafana NK6 in your projects, whether that's personal or yep, other stuff? Because you have a lot of knowledge to share. So we're just curious, when did you first start using Grafana NK6?
Yeah, so I very specifically remember the scenario. I went to Star East 2014, and there's this guy that got up on stage and he said, manual testing is dead. So for those of you guys who don't know, that Star East is a testing conference, and he said that's now the automation is now the baseline. You're no longer an automation engineer as a specialty. So you have to pick 3 specializations. You have to, it's either security, build and testing, build and release, or you have to do performance. And I was like, performance sounds fun. So I started looking into this space. I wasn't really familiar with it. And in around like 2014, I stumbled upon Grafana as a means to like plot basically anything. And I accidentally stumbled into my first performance problem. We had everything where I was working at the time. We had everything set up, and we turned all the lights on for the big, the big test for everything. And I noticed that the bell icon on the web UI never resolved. And I said, uh-oh. And so I was able to kind of, put things together to kind of get like JMeter and like Grafana and everything kind of working together. But that was my first time with that. And then around like 2018, I had an opportunity to do a K6. I just stumbled across it. I was like, oh, this makes more sense. And that was my first opportunity with that. And I've been using it ever since.
Wow, that's such a really great insight. And I was the same. Like I was looking for an alternative. Like this was even like before joining Grafana, because I was familiar with other tools. But then when I found out that there's a tool that I can use where I can write tests in JavaScript, but then it's in performance testing, like I was hooked. So I think that feature where the tests are written in JavaScript, it really opens up a lot of different scenarios that I think now performance is really more accessible to engineers, not just to testers, not just to like performance engineers, but basically to everyone who can code. So if you're serious in checking out performance or even learning about it, I honestly believe like K6 is trying to address that issue because you can write tests as code. And I think so you also spoke at Graphanacon earlier this year, and one of the things that you've shared with the attendees was around OpenMCT. And maybe if it's okay, would you like to share to the people who are watching today's episode what is Open MCT and why is performance important from that perspective?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so OpenMCT stands for Open Mission Control Technologies. It's a framework for working with telemetry sources and different types of things that are specific to space and flight. But one of the funny things, if you go back and watch the Graphanacon talk, one of the funny things is it's we are open source, and randomly one day this guy got on. Working the open source, you get a lot, right? It's people will just jump in and say, this isn't working for me, fix it now. But every once in a while you'll have somebody that says, oh hey, I did this cool thing, take a look. And it was this guy who works on the Oracle F1 racing team, and he presented his OpenMCT implementation to us and a video of Max Verstappen using it in his sims. So it was really cool to see that, totally random, and it was really exciting. But it's like I said, OpenMCT is open source. It works with any telemetry. So like, whatever the Formula One teams are using, I'm actually not sure. But it's been around for a while. It's web-based, which makes it unique in the space. And performance, obviously performance matters, but I guess really the big thing is, OpenMCT itself is very extensible and can be used by multiple missions, multiple, disciplines now with, Formula One in the mix. And what we want to be able to do is give everybody in the community ways to get started with like tutorials, getting started, and performance itself is something that's really important. So we have some tooling that I'm going to show today, actually, for showing how to get started with performance with OpenMCT. But performance really is not that dissimilar for what I'm about to show and what we can talk about today. It's not that dissimilar between what you're doing. It's web-based, it's HTTP, WebSockets, it's all kind of the same. So it's a really interesting project to be a part of, and it's amazing how transferable everything I had done in the past with Grafana, K6, JMeter, and everything kind of fed into what I'm doing today.
I think there are very few use cases where it actually is very mission critical to have these observability and testing tools, because I know pretty much anything NASA does, because of the nature of it, every mission could potentially be millions of dollars. And you would want, if you're investing that much money, then you do want to know what's going on. And that's just the beginning. I think I was doing a few searches earlier trying to get a feel for what costs were involved. And like 50 million, 60 million, that's like pretty standard for a not even too big space launch.
Yeah. And so yeah, I mean, I guess when you look at it that way, yeah, the costs are pretty, the costs are pretty, well, I mean, maybe not, maybe, a new product launch that you're working on, the passion project of a product manager who says this is the greatest thing of all time. Maybe it is worth a lot of money, but fundamentally, the tooling and the practices and everything is largely the same. And I think one of the most fascinating things that I've found is when we're talking about, when we talk about other people doing things in the browser, what makes OpenMCT unique is it is a single page application. And that was unique maybe 5-10 years ago, but now it's not. Single page applications are here to stay. Doing things in the browser isn't that crazy. And the performance improvements that can be made in that space, no pun intended, are absolutely common across the board. So you can leverage whatever, Google spends a lot of money to make it so that you buy that sock like half of a picosecond faster, right? They do everything they can to make everything faster. And we can just kind of tap into that largely us as the general community of web developers, and make a more performant web application, even in with mission control.
Yeah. I know you're gonna demonstrate to us later, like different really awesome features, but because you've created this Open MCT performance GitHub project, can you just walk us through, or give us an overview of what tools it's using, the technology, and how is it, I guess, different from like other projects, or I guess like similar as well?
Sure, yeah, and I'm not here to endorse a particular project. I'm on here on behalf of KVR, but I'm going to demonstrate kind of what I have found to be useful, and very specifically do it in such a way that I can share it with everyone, so that everyone can work with tooling to make a better performing single page application. And if you are using OpenMCT, a baseline of getting started for whatever you're going to do in your own performance efforts. So what I am using in this repo is I'm showcasing K6 as the test runner, K6 browser as the thing that's manipulating a browser, and Prometheus because YAMS, which is yet another mission system. I think it's hard to keep track of the acronyms at NASA. There's too many. But YAMS as our backend provides a native Prometheus endpoint. So does CouchDB, a persistent. So we're just going to use Prometheus as the time series and data aggregation. And then Grafana on top to kind of put it all together so you can get insight onto what's going on with the front end, back end, and the load itself.
Because I think it's also important to understand like the problems that we're trying to solve. I'm guessing like from your I'm sort of curious like from your perspective, what are some general performance problems that you see that I guess most of us experience like when we work in projects. So maybe you could share some insights as to what example performance problems you can see that could happen.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest one I think that would be common is like tuning, performance tuning. Let's say that you have limited resources, limited availability, right? Of limited time, I should say. What can you do with what you have to make the most performant experience? And so I think that's really common across any discipline. And so what this tooling can really do is help you kind of understand the relationship with how things work from a performance perspective from the front end, back end, and whatever you're actually running on. And do it in a way that's kind of like transferable. So, one of the performance problems I know that's out there is, your test data results have all these asterisks on it, right? And they don't match what's going on in production per se. So one of the things you can do with some of this tooling is actually have your production results comparable to what you're doing in your test environment. And what I'm showing here, we'll show a little bit later, is what you can do from your own, MacBook effectively. And it could be used anywhere. And that's pretty powerful for understanding how things are performing. One of the biggest performance issues is, I think, I can speak from experience, is how to have these like gentle conversations with architects and folks that are, lead developers of a particular thing. Is how do you tell them that things aren't working or it's not performant? And so really what I have found, and I think I got this from the Perf Bytes podcast actually years ago, is you tell them, hey, this is how your application is performing on this hardware. I know if you had better hardware, it would be the most beautiful thing that we'd ever seen, the most performant thing. But unfortunately, we're limited by, what you got here. And so here's your application measurements, and here is your, here's unfortunately how it's running on this hardware. So by kind of combining everything, you can do a lot to kind of initiate these performance conversations gently, gracefully, and you do that in any organization that I've ever worked in.
We are a sensitive lot. You got to approach us with caution.
You have to be gentle. We have a question from Mugatu. Are you using Kubernetes in your project? And yeah, like what can you share with us in terms of the NASA stack?
No,
Give us all the details.
Yeah, so no, I can't. So what you're seeing is a representation of what could be done, elsewhere. No, so I'm personally not using Kubernetes today. I've used K6 in the Kubernetes context previously at Red Hat and Ansible, where I was working previous. I used that in that scenario. Yeah, so not specifically, no.
Yeah. Well, maybe you can tell us a bit of some history as well, because you mentioned a while ago that you've used JMeter in the past for performance. What's been your history in using performance tools before K6?
Yeah. Oh man. JMeter. Yeah. No. That's the thing is like, everything I've ever done has been like grassroots. where I'm doing something without a lot of budget, so I have to find something in the open source, and I'm stuck previously. And I think that's probably everywhere. Performance never gets the budget it needs, and never gets the time it needs. And somehow I always ended up getting stuck with JMeter, and JMeter was not necessarily the most fun thing to use. I don't want to be too disparaging, because it's its own thing. But whenever I needed to use JMeter Selenium, that's where things really fell apart.
Oh
Because
man, John, I have thoughts.
yeah,
I so agree with you. So the reason that I'm at K6 is that I was working in a company that heavily used JMeter, and I was doing like some secret squirrel business on the K6 site just to see, what's out there. And I was like, this is better. This is just better in every way. And so I jumped ship and joined them. And I really totally agree with you when you say that JMeter on its own already has issues, GUI based, and it's all XML. So hard to put in CI/CD, or hard to tell what's changed. But also, JMeter plus Selenium is using the WebDriver plugin is pretty much the way to combine backend and front end in the same tool, but it's not really the same tool, because you need both JMeter and Selenium, and that the memory requirement on that was even worse than having JMeter and having Selenium separately. So it was just like the worst of everything.
Hmm.
yeah. It very so. Again, I guess one of the biggest things that I ran into, and it applies to why I ended up choosing Playwright. Just in general, I'm using that on everything I work on in different projects. Is Selenium up until 4.1 really didn't take ownership of the dependencies. So in order to get JMeter Selenium to work, you had to have the right JRE, you had to have the right WebDriver client, the right Chrome binary. You needed everything to be right. You had to source it all on your own. There was no ready to go thing. So just getting to the first test of turning the lights on was pretty miserable. I understand that Selenium's done a lot recently to take back ownership of all of this. So maybe it's better now, but my experience with it up until 2018 wasn't great.
Yeah. I've added a comment because one of our K6 champion, Jagorsh Pitchnik, he actually created this really insightful video, like showcasing the differences between JMeter and K6. So I think like it's still up to everyone's context, but in this video, he really covers like the pros of and cons of like the two tools, and it's more of like his personal experience. So if you're looking at like trying out like K6, but then you're coming from JMeter or like vice versa, then yeah, I highly recommend watching this video because it's really insightful. But one tool that you mentioned, John, a while ago was K6 browser. um I think Nicole shared my JMeter versus K6
Yeah,
video.
thanks, Marie. I've also made a video on JMeter versus K6, just so you know. There it
I
is.
need to highlight our K6 champions. You're already a champion, Nicole. But anyway, K6 browser, John. So it's something like relatively new that we have introduced here at K6. But why? Why K6 browser? So we're interested to hear your thoughts about it.
Yeah, sure. K6 browser solves, I think, two very specific things. It's how to manage um, a browser, like a load testing framework would. Treat it with a different life cycle. The problem with functional test automation, and I tell this to every management team I work with, the first day one. The problem is, I can tell you that the things that I'm looking for in a functional test worked once in one order according to my specification that's very limited, right? And the test frameworks that do that are designed for doing something very, very, very quickly to get to that assertion and then go back. get to that assertion and go back. And what what I think K6 browser solves is kind of giving the life cycle of a user kind of something that's a little bit more like what a user would do. So stay and idle and do something like a user would for longer. A user isn't going to find the sock that they want on Google, buy it immediately, and then shut everything down and walk away, right? That's not what a user is going to do. They're going to, sit there for a little while. They're going to do certain things, and they're going to, not everybody's going to get on at the same time. And so leveraging a load testing tool to kind of manage and shape, what a user would do is kind of different, functionally different from what a functional test framework would do if you tried to roll your own. The second thing I'll say is around exporting data. So that's really the reason that I really liked. Ultimately, the reason that I chose K6 browser for what I was going to do was exporting data to different data sources. So the K6 test runner can export your measurements very completely, concisely, and totally hands off to a lot of different backends, or to CSV or to disk. It doesn't really matter, but that's really challenging. I tried to roll my own with InfluxDB, and I got it working. It took a lot of time, but it didn't give me the capability I needed. And then K6 browser was announced, and so I started using that instead.
Yeah. I think you've been sharing a lot of your insights as well to the community, and you've been sharing recommended practices, because I think it's quite easy to misuse a tool, especially if you're not familiar with recommended practices. So I'm curious if like there are recommended practices that you really follow through, even if you're not even if you're not using K6 browser, but you're using other tools as well.
Yeah. So really, what I'd say is I I would do everything you can to emulate what a user is actually going to do, and I'll demo that. Because what you think a user is going to do in a HTTP based test is not necessarily what a user is really going to do. Um,
Yeah.
and so you need to add think time, which is a very common practice in traditional load testing, but you need to add think time to your browser based tests, regardless of if you use K6, JMeter, Selenium, whatever it is. You need to add the think time that, again, a functional test suite isn't equipped to handle or isn't designed to handle natively.
Mm.
Um, and what I would say is try to choose a tool that can be shared among other parts of the organization in language and in scripting. So one of the cool things about K6 browser is that it uses Playwright-like APIs. It's not using Playwright necessarily under the hood, but that makes it pretty easy to work with speak the same language as your front end development team, who also is probably using Playwright or something very close to it. And I think one of the biggest challenges with any browser-based testing and any browser-based tooling is kind of keeping your keeping up with development. So hopefully your front end team is making changes, adding value. Hopefully they're doing things, and a lot of that will unfortunately lead to mean that you need to change your test to kind of keep up as the application moves, changes form basically. So choosing kind of the same language as your front end team is really easy to do in K6 because it's JavaScript. But it's something else that you really should keep in mind. And I can talk to one approach that I've been using called contract testing, or I don't have a good name for it because I don't work in marketing. I'll say locator contract testing is a pattern I've been using. Maybe we can talk about that now or a little bit later.
Yeah. Because we've spoken about contract testing in the past, but I've never heard of a contract based like locator strategy approach. So maybe John, you can explain a bit more what that is.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess one of the things that I've noticed in this space is that folks are reinventing the wheel when it comes to how they work with and engage with the evolving application. That's something that a functional test developer like myself has had to deal with since whenever I got started, and that is the hooks and the mechanisms that Selenium, Playwright, Cypress use to hook into where things are on the page are dependent on it being the same, it being repeatable, and it being deterministic, and it being resilient. So as time has gone by, the different testing frameworks, functional testing frameworks have done a good job of making it so that when you click on a button called create, that it's going to click on the create button, even if the CSS changes, even if the DOM changes. So what contract test does is it takes your browser-based test and the locator logic for how you're going to select that create button and moves it into the PR. And what this does is it means that as the front end team changes where that button is, what it looks like, how you would select it with a functional or automated K6 test, browser test, you can be either aware or influence when that's going to change without your test just failing. So what I've seen, not where I work now, but what I've seen is the synthetic user tests will fail and it'll send off the same alert for the search button changing or the create button changing as the end of the world, everything is down. And so you have to be very careful in that space in making better locators and making sure that your locators are always in step with front end development.
Yeah, it's funny thinking about locators with contract tests, because whenever I hear about contract testing, I always think about APIs for back end, REST endpoints and things like that. So it's kind of interesting to think about it for the locators, because if you're not using like some sort of an identifier that's the same all the time, you rely on a CSS query or something to locate, or a DOM query to locate a component. Yeah, it can be problems. That's interesting. Yeah, I never really thought about it. That's why I'm a back end developer. I just it's too much on the front end stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I know in the testing world that we hear a lot about this in terms of having self-healing tests. And, self-healing is like marketing speak, but what it actually means is, things like having multiple ways to select something. So trying one way, but then if that fails, then using another way. And then another approach might be using standards like the ARIA locators are the ones that are recommended. And the other approach that you've mentioned, John, is actually just, communicating with the developers and being like, hey, when you change this, it really messes up the test. So can we come up with some sort of naming convention, or can you not just change things willy-nilly for no reason? Or are you okay with me going in and changing some of these so that it's a little bit more standardized?
Yeah, absolutely. And so that to 2 points. Yeah. So I think something I was afraid of until about 2019 or 2020 was making the changes myself to make a more resilient locator. And what I would recommend to everyone on this call, if you are doing browser-based testing, functional or performance, just learn how to make the changes. It's really JavaScript developers get paid way too much for how easy that was to make the changes. It's not that bad. But the other thing you mentioned was ARIA. So one of the biggest changes that I've seen since I started using Playwright actually is this move away from I guess hidden locator logic. So the way that you used to be able to, but you can still do it. The old practice was, let's embed some diagnostic information that a test could use to determine where a button is on the page by something called a data test ID. And Mary, this is actually something we talked about in Cypress whenever that, I don't even remember how long ago now.
Yeah.
And that's changed. So the new practice is, and I won't say best practice, but the new practice is just leverage what the screen readers are using.
Yeah.
So the same boundaries between the test and the application is felt by the screen readers. So the screen readers need to explain where everything is. They need to do that in a very deterministic way, so that people that are have some sort of disability can either interact by key press or by being read back what's on the screen in exactly the same way. But Paul, to your point, there is no CSS, so screen readers can't use CSS at all. It's literally invisible to screen readers. So there's certain things you can do to make your tests more resilient. And for me, what I've been doing for the past 2 years is ARIA. I've been making the application more accessible, and who's going to argue against that? And making it more testable. Who's going to argue against that?
Yeah.
Do it in such a way that it benefits functional, automated, and those with disabilities.
That's a really great point. And I think, Nicole, we've spoken about accessibility as well this week, but having that as your locator strategy, it's also it's like hitting two birds with one stone. Like, you're making your site accessible and you're making your tests robust and reliable, so it's like a win-win to both teams. So it's really great that you've recommended the ARIA labels as a way to identify elements. I'm curious because, like, looking at the time, and I know you've got a lot of amazing stuff to demonstrate with us, John. So do you want to get started with the demo? And
Demo.
Demo,
Yeah, sure.
demo.
show us what you've
Yeah.
been working.
Yeah. And again, I'm sorry. So hopefully the demo screen isn't going to freeze like my webcam is, but let's see. All right. So can you all see my screen here?
If you
We
switch, yeah.
Yes, but you can switch.
Okay.
We
Open.
see ourselves.
Yeah. Performance.
Nice,
All right.
yeah.
So we have
Could you
OpenMCT.
increase the font on that, please?
Yeah. So we have something that's not indexed, OpenMCT performance. So let me go to GitHub and do unlikely 0. Let's see, let's just start from here. So what I have here is a public demo for OpenMCT performance. And this repo is, I'm not going to read all this, but it's kind of a showcase for how you can get started with testing OpenMCT with the OpenMCT Quick Start repo. So we want to provide, as I said, we do a lot to provide the general community with ways to get started with OpenMCT, specifically with Quick Start, how you could basically run a production-like environment, like with Docker Compose up. So that's what we're going to use in the back end here. Is Docker Compose up. It's literally this easy. And then once you have that running, we're going to go over, it's a brew install K6 or however else you want to get it. And then npm install. And that should be all you need to kind of get going with the tests. So let's go ahead and do that. So let me take a minute to just go back to VS Code. And if you all could tell me, can you all see this? Is this pretty good in terms of sizing?
A little bigger.
Yeah. Okay. There we go. All right. So let me just show everybody OpenMCT Quick Start really quick. So I have it running in the background again with the Docker Compose up. So let's
I have a question, John,
Sure.
a very basic one.
Sure.
How does NASA define a mission?
Define a mission?
Yeah, so OpenMCT, you said, is mission control technologies, right? So what classifies as a mission?
I'm actually not sure. That's a really good question. There's a lot of folks using this across the agency. And I actually don't know where a mission starts and ends. I'm a NASA contractor working for KBR, and this is my first time. It's But it is, it is a lot of fun, and unfortunately, I don't have that insight. Sorry. Um,
That's okay. I was just
Yeah.
curious.
yeah. So what you're looking at here is OpenMCT, and you're looking at OpenMCT. Let's just break it down really quick. You have your tree, which is how you would interact with your telemetry, your data sources. And OpenMCT itself is very extensible and pluggable to work with whatever telemetry you have or persistent backend you're using, Elasticsearch, CouchDB. And then on your right is some information about the object that you're going to interact with. And so if you look here, I'm going to use the search bar and look for num commands, which is just a telemetry object for the YAMS backend. Doesn't really matter in this case, and you're just looking at a plot of it. And so what you can do is you can create these very, very, very interesting and complex displays. Let me go to the main page, because this is the officially sanctioned version of what everyone's allowed to talk about. This one right here. So this is a display layout that represents what somebody could use in a mission. So you have your gauges, right, showing telemetry, a larger view of both historical and real-time telemetry, issues from the lunar soundstage. The moon here, that shows you all of the of what a lunar rover driver would see. These are just images from the Apollo mission. And then you also have, a different type of gauge here. But with OpenMCT, the power of it is everyone in the mission is using the same, in a mission, could be looking at the same telemetry in different ways that make sense to them. So somebody driving the rover is potentially going to be looking at a different display than a scientist looking at the data coming back from a scientific instrument, right? So they can take the same telemetry sources and create something that kind of works for them. So I'm going to just do that now. I'll just show you just super quick. You can take that num commands and just drag that into here. And then you have that data as a view type as a plot, right? So you could craft something that makes sense for you and finish editing, and then you have your display. And so that's kind of how OpenMCT works. This is a stupid version of it. This is a very condensed, super basic version of it. This is not how complex as it gets. But what I want to show you all is this being automated with a front-end performance test. So let me go and close that. Here we are here. And let me just, I'm not going to follow along in the GitHub. I'm just going to do this. But yeah, if you want to follow along, you can just take this GitHub. All of this is available with a Docker compose up. So the first thing I want to show is how to write a front-end test that kind of matches what kind of the practices that we follow in terms of contracts and locators and everything like that. So what I have here is a very specific version of Playwright installed in the background that will let you use the same locator strategy as K6 Browser. So like I said earlier, K6 Browser and Playwright now have diverged a little bit in terms of their locator strategy, just a little bit. So in order to make it the same, I went kind of back in time and found the same. So when you do an npm install, you're going to get the right one. So what I'm going to do is run this command called npm run test record. And this is going to run npx playwright open. And what you're looking at here is the Playwright inspector. And right now, Playwright is driving this browser. And when I click this, recording what you're doing. So I'm going to do what I just did manually. You go to localhost 8040. And look at that. So the browser went there. And the test recorded the page go to and the URL, right? So that's pretty significant. The right there, that's a lot. I'm keeping track of what's going on, but what I really want to show you all is when you're using the Playwright recorder tooling, when you hover over this, you can see what the browser sees, right? This is, or sorry, what the test framework sees in order to make this a unique click. So in order for any functional test browser, functional test and K6, in order to determine what's unique on a page, it's limited to what's available in the DOM. And so right now I'm hovering over this this element that says A has text, imagery, display layout, display layout. Okay, that's the unique thing that makes it the most unique. And the Playwright Code Gen will do its best to show you what the most unique way of identifying something is. And my art history professor from college just heard me say most unique and would have given me an F because there's only unique. There's nothing that's most unique. But yeah, so here's what we're going to work with today. So you saw me use search. So right now, look at this. This is a really bad locator.
Yeah.
It's the class name C search, and it's the nth. So that means that's the order. So that means that as you change the application layout, the number of search bars on a page, which is totally reasonable, right? Your locator strategy will break. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, what I've done personally is I added this ARIA OpenSearch search input. And just as an aside, that's not correct ARIA. That's not meeting the exact specifications of the WCAG, and it's not the best practices, but that was the very first one that I did, and I've learned a lot since then, and I will fix this eventually. But it's important. It's not going to be easy to start making these changes, but it's important to get started immediately so that you can learn. And I've learned a lot as I've gone along. So what I'm going to do here is click in, and you can see it did a page locator click, right? And then I'm going to type in num commands, right? And when I do num commands, it's going to show me these results here, right? It's going to show me what comes back instantly. And I'm going to stop the test here, just so for time's sake, and just show you what we're working with here. Now with the Playwright Inspector, you can change the language of the test. So the APIs can be code modded on the fly. So here's the PyTest version of it. Here's the MS Test C# version of this test, right? And you can see how powerful that is, right? You can just start going, and if you have a team that's a Java team using Java Playwright or Python Playwright, you can speak the same language and use the same locators. And so your contracts can remain the same despite the language. So what we're going to do here is go to the raw library, because the raw library best matches what the K6 library looks like now. And you could just take this and plop this in to the test case here and run it. But because we're out of time, I'm going to spend 0 time debugging it. If anything possibly goes wrong, I'm just going to execute this. So this is a K6 browser test that has that goes to the URL. It clicks on the search bar. It enters in num commands, right? And then it checks that the result is visible, right? That's the test. And this, this tells you a lot, right? This tells you a lot. This tells you, is Apache up? This tells you, is OpenMCT served correctly? This tells you, is the search bar visible? This tells you, is the backend able to serve up this telemetry? This tells you a lot in a very small test. And what I would recommend to everyone is, when you're looking at ways to get going, just start here. Just do the smallest thing and get that running, and you're going to learn a lot. If this doesn't come back, it could be any number of things. It could take longer because the back end's getting slower, right? That's news. It could not come back at all, which means you probably shouldn't be the first one to say something. Somebody else should have figured that out a while ago. But yeah, there's a lot of power here with these very simple, small tests.
Yeah. Just a very quick comment from my side. It's really amazing to see that we can also leverage the Playwright Recorder, and this is really helpful in like different ways. Like first, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can use an existing one that works really amazing. And then secondly, if you're new to coding but you want to try front end browser, I think like the record feature is a great way to start learning how to code. And like you said, it's just easy to port it into K6 browser. Like you only had to add the check like assertion. So it's like a really great way to learn about Playwright and also about K6 browser.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. So what I'm going to do now is npm run test yam search, and you don't need to use npm. I just use it because I don't know. I just use it. I don't want to introduce makefiles. I don't want to do makefiles. I know that's the right way to do it. Don't judge me. So yeah, so this worked. So we had a custom check, num commands appears in search result, and it passed. Right? That's fantastic. And so that's a visual test. That's a test. And what happened when I ran that is this data or this measurement, all of these measurements were sent back to the second half of the stack. So the second half of the stack that I'm going to demo is Grafana on Prometheus on top of cAdvisor. So let me go there and show you that. So I'm going to click on Grafana. And so here's the test results that just ran in the last 15 minutes. This test is very simple. This is what you're looking at is the official Grafana dashboard that just shows that, yes, everything was happy, 200 responses, the check passed, and everything is great. And this is made possible by using the Prometheus Write thing that's set up here, so you can get it going. But this is all available, on the Grafana documentation and example repos. But when you're doing this, you can start to combine this with, how did the backend work during that time, right? This is the load that the browser had on the backend. These are the requests. This is the YAMS APM measurements. No errors, right? That's good. And then you can combine your front end tests with cAdvisor or Node Exporter or whatever that's running, and get an understanding of, yes, in the last 15 minutes, nothing of interest happened because it was such a small test. Yeah, so that's kind of, I'm gonna combine all this together at the grand reveal at the end. But let's keep going really quick to how to convert a browser-based test into a HTTP-based test. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a different command, npm run har record. And what this is going to do is it's going to launch Playwright in the same way. It's automatically going to go to the correct host, just to make sure that the wrong things aren't recorded or the right things are recorded. And it's going to save the har traffic to disk. And the har is the portable format that all web browsers keep to kind of show, keep a log of what's happened with HTTP, right? So this has been around, I don't even know how long, but it's a portable format that can be interpreted by a lot of different tools. And Playwright itself natively supports recording those. So let's run that same test and see what is recorded. So I'm not going to record the browser interactions. I'm just going to do this. So I type in num commands ANDS. Okay. And yeah, so that nothing special has happened. But how many requests, Paul? How many requests do you think that generated? How many requests do you think that generated?
It's going to be like 10, right?
He singled you out because you just outed yourself for not having watched John's talk at GrafanaCon.
Right?
And you're wrong.
No.
Yeah, so the search, so this is the har from that test. Oh boy. And that's the yeah. So let me do request. Request happen. Oh, so it happened a lot. So let me do the grand reveal of the number of requests on the next step. So that's the raw har, and again, this is very portable. It has everything inside of it: cookies, headers, everything that the browser is actually doing recorded to disk. So this is a really good practice of kind of making sure that your browser-based tests are performing as needed. So let me then do my next trick, which is this is an open source package that's been unrelated to anything I'm about to show you. There, somebody created a har to K6 converter that takes a raw har file, again, remember it's universal, and converts it to a K6 script. So I'm going to do just that. So it is yams search from har. So it just converts it. It's in, out. Pretty simple. And so what we have now is search from har has all of the commands. So that answer that question, it is response. 118 requests, Paul.
Oh, I was just off by one.
To be
Yeah,
fair,
legit.
in his video, it was 22.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, so it's a lot, right? It's a lot. There's a lot going on. And so that really speaks to the importance of browser testing, load testing, right? With traditional HTTP traffic doesn't give you the whole story, and your front end team could be doing something that you don't want them to do, right? So generating more traffic than you anticipated. So it's always important to verify that the browser-based traffic matches the performance profile that the backend tests have done, HTTP-based tests have done. Always important. Yeah, so let's run that test just to prove that we can do it. There's nothing special about it, but let's run that test. Test yams search from
Search from har?
yeah, but it did not. My terminal is not having a good time. Search from har. There we go. All right. Yeah, so this test is going to run. And yeah, you can see I've given it a very specific profile of running it with 10 virtual users. And we can see now how this test, when running, has a different impact on the backend. So things are going to be a little bit different. You might be able to hear it, but my computer fans are turning on. That's the first difference. Yeah, so unfortunately, everything's co-located on my MacBook, so everything's impacted. But yeah, you can start to see things are starting to climb, right? So the ops team is starting to see something. And then if we change it and go to this and look at the last 15 minutes, yeah, look at that. So things are really starting to get going. Look at the old traffic of a single user, right? Things are really starting to get going here. And so this is potentially, where a backend team starts to get the alerts, right? So any number of things could be going on here. So let's go back to the test. But yeah, so that's a way to basically make sure that your front end tests, or that your front end is not being a bad citizen and doing things to the back end that it shouldn't. Often, unfortunately, the front end is the bearer of bad news. So it has to report on all of the problems that any single component in the full stack has. And the users feel it through the UI. That's the unfortunate part. But at the same time, the front end can do things that are not necessarily good for the back end, and the back end doesn't perform. And this is a common problem that I see. And in our case, it's a matter of optimization. So in this particular case, what's actually going on is if you go to localhost here, 8040, what's actually happening is we are debouncing the commands at a different rate. So if I type in num 10 requests m, see, a lot can be returned, right? 50. And then you can see how this goes up. And, this is an optimization for for, if we can afford to do this, if we have the hardware, we can run very quickly. But what you could do with OpenMCT is change the debounce logic for the input, for example, and you see, we can change the number of requests here. And this is, maybe the debounce broke, right? But we can go from 110 down to 19, right? And this is why it's super important when you're writing these browser-based tests that you do it as a user would. So you need to be very specific in what you're doing, because it can have drastic effects on this. And so the next thing I want to just show, just because of timing, is just move on to combining the tests together. So what I have here is a combination of that front end test with the back end test. So what I'm doing right now is I'm actually querying the heaviest, most important, and first API response. So the biggest difference between or one of the biggest things that I've found in browser-based testing is that Chrome does not give you necessarily all the tools that you need to make the most performant app. You're always limited by 6 concurrent HTTP transactions, with HTTP 1 at least, which HTTP 2, that's a little bit different. So if you have a very expensive and long-running request, it will effectively block subsequent requests. So for us, this is the most expensive request in this particular scenario. And so we need to do our best to kind of keep track of that. So what I have here is I've created a scenario where I kind of ramp up the number of people making this request over time, and I'm keeping track of how does that affect the browser. So 2 tests running together, or it's same test, right? But 2 different protocols. You have browser and you have the quote unquote backend, which is just HTTP. So how does the back end influence the front end, and how does the front end influence the back end? So let me go ahead and just run that test really quick. npm run test, search with sorry. Oh no, terminal test VMs. Okay, search with marks. That's it. All right. Yeah. So here's that same test. So what you're looking at now is K6 launching a browser, performing that num commands test, making sure that it works. Right. It's doing this, but in the background, it's launching 31 users that are, basically creating load against the backend. What you could do probably is take the raw har test and turn it into something, so you have these fictional users doing this. But it's a way that you can basically make sure that kind of everything's in sync, the front end and the back end tests. So running in a hybrid fashion. So let me stop there, because I've been talking for 7 minutes straight.
No, but this is a really great demo, because I know we've had questions from the community, like asking, oh, how can I run, I don't know, for example, 4,000 browser users, and like one of the recommended practices is still run the majority of the traffic via the protocol level, because we really need to see like what the impact is in the backend, and running it on the protocol is a really like much more inexpensive way of doing things. Whereas if you're doing everything from the browser, it's good that you still have one browser test, but maybe 4,000, maybe that's a bit overkill.
Exactly. So to speak to that very specifically, so in the JMeter Selenium Dark Ages, it was the rule of thumb was 1,000. So you could execute 1,000 concurrent HTTP sessions on one core, or a single browser-based test with Selenium, and it's like 1 gig to 512 megabytes of memory to do one browser-based session versus some minuscule amount of memory. And so when you ideally in a perfect world, you could run as many K6 browser sessions as you wanted. And let me not even just say K6 browser, let me say, JMeter or, any other tool. But in reality, that would be incredibly expensive to have, 1,000 cores to simulate 1,000 users. So another practice is kind of showing what I just demoed, which is you capture what you perceive to be the performance profile, and then you turn that into a lower level protocol like HTTP, and then you can ramp that up independent. And so my computer here could probably do, probably do 1,000 users with a single browser. And the last thing to kind of finish the demo that I want to show is it's not so much what your front end can do for you, but what you can do for your front end. So, well, let me show you really quick what's happening here in this test. In this test, there's one extra thing that I'm doing here. So we don't have time to go into this in depth, but what's happening here is I'm injecting effectively performance measurements into the DOM and into the application. And performance dart marks are a way that web browsers, independent of front-end performance testing, use to kind of keep track of the user experience. How long does it take to do something? So in this case, I'm injecting these marks into the running application to see how long does it take for the search to become available and the search to be entered, right? And the search to be returned. And all of these things are being stored internal to the browser, right? So what I'm effectively getting is measurements being reported inside out. And that's really powerful because it makes it so that these tests are a little bit more accurate, a little bit more precise, and a little bit more transferable as you move where the tests are being executed. So you're not recording. So my computer could be here, but the backend or the browser or whatever could be in Japan. So with this, you have network, you have everything in between. But if you report inside out, not only are you getting a more accurate and precise result, but you're getting one that actually matches the user experience. So when you add all this up, you can just do this simple thing called window performance measure to get total search time. How long does it take to perform the search from the user's perspective? And then with K6, you can turn that into a custom metric called total search time, and then keep track of that in your test. So in here, I have an assertion that says that no search should come back in greater than 242 seconds, right? That or less than that, really, but bad math. But yeah, but at the same time, you can also keep track of that metric here and see how that changes. See how a user's experience changes as you add more traffic. And I'll put that all together here to say, let's see, that with the quick start demo, what I've created here is a kind of a view into combining, APM infrastructure, right, per test, and combining that with your K6 results to get a really good view. But the last view, which I don't have necessarily working too well, is, let's see, K6, what did we call it? Total search time. You can keep track of your custom metrics that are meaningful to you. So you can see as we added more users, right? Virtual users in a steady fashion. Look what happened to the total search time. It continued to creep up. And so you can make this relationship now with how your backend's performing, how your infrastructure is performing, and what the actual raw user experience is with the all of the context that the front end team would have, which is how long does it take for this to actually return and be visible in the DOM for the user. That's it. That's my demo.
I have really warm, fuzzy feelings with this demo because it's just showcasing like so many amazing stuff. Like I'm really excited because this sorts of reaffirms what our vision is for K6 browser. And like with some people, they might get confused. Why is K6 also creating a browser testing tool? There's already so many things in the market, but this really gives a perfect example because by using the same tool, you can get insights on both the front end and back end performance. You can reuse the same test, like write it in the same script for both front end and back end. And the way you've demonstrated it, John, really reaffirms that. So thank you. It's so awesome.
Yeah, I really appreciate that call out on the, to simulate like 1,000 browser, sessions. Just you really only need the one browser session.
Yeah.
Just do the actual protocol level to create all all the noise, I guess, that your one browser is going to go against.
Yeah. So before we finish, John, how can people, I guess, if there are people who want to contribute to this amazing project that like you're part of, like, are you looking for contributors? And if so, how can people learn about this?
Yeah, so yeah, thanks for asking. So yeah, OpenMCT, open source. It has a healthy community for contributing. And so what I would just say to that is you can go to the discussion here, and we have this thing called the Open ETE Testing Initiative. So for those of you that are not developers but testers, what you can do is you can start to contribute to NASA specifically in tests. So what we're doing is identifying tests that we just don't have time to write, or we haven't necessarily prioritized for X, Y, and Z, and we turn those into stubs, and then you can come in and write them. So it's a totally normal CLA process that you would do as a developer, but you can help write tests, and this would go a long way in helping us. And it's a great way to we have learned a lot from people writing tests. There's a lot of people out there that maybe don't have an opportunity to do something that's open source and testing, right? A lot of the time tests are the secret sauce, and something that you never sees the light of day, so you work in darkness. So this is an opportunity to show people what you're capable of, learn from what we're doing, and we learn from other folks that bring their own patterns and approaches. um, and yeah, that's a great way to contribute.
Amazing. We'll add that to the video description as well. But yeah, I think we are done for today. We went a bit over time, but I think it was all worth it because you've demonstrated such a really awesome feature of combining both front end and back end performance in one script. Next week, we're back with another episode. I think we'll be talking about private load zones. Is that correct, Nicole?
Yes, so
Yeah.
we have previously talked about private load zones before. One of the common problems with any type of load testing is what happens if the thing that you're load testing is not publicly accessible for one reason or another. Maybe it's not in production yet, or maybe it's an internal application. So what happens if it's behind firewalls? We already have a way to address this problem, which we have tackled in a previous K6 office hours, but there's a part two, and that's coming next week. We are going to be they already have reinvented the entire wheel with that. It now runs on Kubernetes. It uses a Kubernetes operator for K6, and it's way easier. And I'm really excited to talk to our colleagues about it. So Paul's going to be back, and we'll also have Daniel Gonzalez Lopez and Olha Yevtushenko. So stay tuned for that next week.
It's gonna be a good
Awesome.
one.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, John, for being an amazing guest. And I hope everyone will have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye,
Bye.
Bye.
everyone. Thank